'78, the big, what our kids would call a large CD.
You're talking about a record?
A record, yes, a vinyl. Actually, it's not even, whatever they made them out of way back in the day.
And they weren't refrigerated.
From way back in the day.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah,
Here
that
we
was
go.
a different,
They made it out of different material.
material, but I think it was still.
Thank you so much, sweetheart.
I thought we were gonna do bottled water for this trip in here. We didn't get 2 cases.
Yeah, she was,
I don't know.
I think she's
I
gonna
didn't see
get
it in
pretty
the
smart
single
dog. She's
plate.
already
Yeah, Lago.
pretty much going to the door when she's done.
Probably back. Very. Oh, that's good.
Oh, yeah, we've had 3.
Not reading it, so
Very
very
teachable.
Yeah.
Trainable. Took the dog out with it. No?
Well, and the size is right, and we don't usually, the female doesn't get much more.
How much? 20?
We don't shed.
Emma said she had to take a muscle relaxer.
All, very little.
Yeah. She took, I don't know, she took one for the night.
Was she all sore?
She got, we didn't take the muscle relaxer now.
Their hair. You have to
There's
groom
one
Oh, yeah,
on
we get
the
it, we get it
back.
shaved, we get it
And
shaved.
she couldn't literally sit down. She was so, and John was taking her.
Although they say if you don't need to do that,
And
that's
I
why
gave her a couple shots. Oral pain.
yeah, it's an insulation.
So when I came over to Vista,
It's still, you can't help but look at it, like, you got all that fur on it.
Well, we still have like a whole 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Y'all can't get Martin.
No, so that'll be gone for him. Where's your, what is it?
Sweet tarts.
Sweetheart.
You like sweet tarts?
Oh my goodness.
Oh, my buddy. It's
Go
funny.
buy a buggy. Yeah, he's gotta go in and get his sweetheart.
I should show you a picture from Port Arthur, where we had the whole line, the whole side of the inside of the command trailer lined with boxes of sweet tarts.
Boxes of them
Yeah.
were in here for.
Well, they started out.
You know his teeth is gonna rot out before he retires.
Was that a candy that came along when you were
But
little?
until they use
Generation?
their baby
My son's
teeth,
48.
you still got
I think it might have been. We never
Maybe
had
it's
them.
fine.
Yeah,
I
my kids.
remember when we had them,
We didn't have them when I was
It's like
growing up.
baby teeth.
I had them as a kid, but I don't remember.
Yeah, but I'm 71
I don't remember how old I was when I was a kid though.
You don't remember how old?
You're not
you
sick.
were?
When you were a kid, you were probably about 6, 7 years old.
I was in my 20s, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Late bloomer.
Okay.
There's suckers going straight downhill before.
I know before you get started.
Maybe I should,
Yeah, this is Marty, everybody.
Yeah,
I like
introduce
Julie.
yourself.
Hey, Marty.
I've already been go around. The only one I knew was
Connie. I guess I was told. Judy.
Judy.
Bonnie.
Claudine. Rich.
Yeah.
And Mark.
And Marty.
And Marty. Y'all won't forget.
Listen, Emma and John usually sit here.
See, I told you they were assigned C.
They're not
Not really.
Sunday.
Not really. Well, I went a little farther out because I didn't know if Scott and Joanne.
They're back, aren't
They are back.
they? I have not seen them.
They are going.
I like it though. I try to read the chapter.
Joanne has
Before we
someone
come in, so.
that works at Gateway, the church there on 183. Yeah.
So you did, right?
Yeah, they've been going there.
Why? Because I didn't see it this morning. I don't even come this
Who is
service.
it?
It's the Dohertys.
Artists. Yeah.
Well, how's it going?
Yeah.
They like the man.
Well, it is 6 o'clock. We're gonna get started because I got to tell you something. I don't know how we're gonna fit all this in one list.
It's a good one.
Well, I tell you what. You know, just to start off with review, we're going through the Bible in like a flash. All right, and story of the garden, story of Israel, story of Jesus, story of the church, story of the new garden. And last time before you guys went on your mission trip, which I'm going to let you talk about that here in a little bit. We went through the first part, all right, which was basically the creation, the fall, the flood, and the fall. And so what we're starting today is the story of Israel, which is going to take a while. And it's going to be all the stuff that no one ever wants to talk about, basically the Old Testament. And today, because we combined lessons, we're really going through All right, and so we're going to go flying through it pretty quick. But this really is the story of the beginning of Jesus coming to this earth to redeem us. So when you got the fall, basically as soon as we hit Genesis 3 and we get Adam and Eve doing their thing, you get God coming in the garden saying, what the heck did you do? And he says, in essence, the seed of the woman is going to come and fix all this. All right, now that's the Chris paraphrase. That's not a word-for-word translation, but that's sort of that's sort of where we're going. So to put it into context, the whole reason that we're doing this is really to get a biblical idea of the arch of the story and really begin to answer the questions that create our worldview. And our worldview, this is a Ravi Zachariah thing, basically is answering 4 questions. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Okay? So if you think about what we did 2 weeks ago, it was really talking about origin. You know, God created the earth, and we get into a little bit of morality. So what's happening now is we're going to pick up where we left off. And I'm trying to go quick, but stop me if I go too quick. So we ended last time
Laughing at that picture.
Yeah.
laughing at that picture with the Spanish guys coming up the wall there. So this is a representation of the Tower of Babel. So at the Tower of Babel, basically God came down and said, nuts, it's been after the flood, and these people are at it again. All right? They're at it again. And they're all together, and they're building a tower into the sky so that they can become gods. And we get into Nimrod. We talked a little bit about, you know, the Nephilim, the giants in the land and all that. And so what happened, as we've talked about before, is the dispersion. In essence, God confused the language and then pushed them out. All right? And now we have nations. And those nations are really starting to worship other gods. All right? Other little gods. Small g's. Okay?
Could you maybe bring us a copy of that next week?
You want me to bring it?
I mean, the week after?
Yeah.
Or next week? Yeah.
Yeah, next week. Yeah, be glad to.
Okay.
So we get now that God took and he confused their language, and now we have nations. All right? And if you look, I think it's on the 3rd page, you've got, I went ahead and grabbed this little time thing. And timing, putting a time in on biblical events, especially in the early age of the Bible, is a shot in the dark. Okay, so you take these sort of as general guidelines, not specifics. Usher took and put dates on things based on the years that were said in the Bible from the generations. Okay.
Who is Usher?
Usher was a yeah. Okay. Not really in this case. He was a priest, a monk, and basically he was a Catholic monk. You say Catholic, they weren't Catholic at that point. And what he did was his project was to try to put everything in dates, put dates and everything.
Y'all made it. Good.
How you guys doing?
But you know, in the story on number 2, where God builds the nation,
When
it has
did
to
he
put
do
different
this?
timelines.
Oh, wait,
Way back.
Way back.
Okay.
Yeah.
It says Abraham died in 1991, and this is 1921. It's called Abraham.
Yeah. Well, it's going backwards. You got to remember.
Yeah, I know, but backwards.
Yeah. So again, take these dates according to Usher as a general time frame. So what you're looking at is from the Tower of Babel until Abraham is probably about 200 years, roughly speaking. Okay? So that's sort of the point of it. It's been about 200 years since the Tower of Babel. So what we get from that is God is pulling a nation out of this mess. All right? So we're going to go with the highbrow video here first.
There once was a man named Abram who was a descendant of Noah. God told him to move with his wife Sarai, an entire family away from where they lived. God made a promise. I will make you into a great nation and bless you, and all of the people on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram and his family left. At one point, they stopped and God told him to look around. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your children. Then, one night, God took Abram outside. Look up and count the stars. This is the number of children you will have. But Abram was already 75 years old, and Sarai was way too old to have children. So they decided that Sarai's servant Hagar should have Abram's child. Hagar became pregnant and gave birth to a son named Ishmael. Yet, God told Abram again, you will be the father of many nations. God changed their names to Abraham and Sarah and promised that it would be through Sarah that God's blessing would come. Exactly as God promised, Sarah became pregnant, giving birth to a son named Isaac. When Isaac was still a young boy, God told Abraham to take his son up on a mountain and sacrifice him. Abraham took Isaac, laid him on an altar, and took out his knife to kill him. But an angel stopped Abraham, and God provided a ram to sacrifice in place of Isaac. Years later, Abraham and Sarah died and left everything they owned to Isaac. Isaac married and had twin sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau was Isaac's favorite, and as the oldest, he was set to gain his father's inheritance. But Jacob wanted the inheritance, so he came up with a scheme to trick his father, who was now old and blind, into promising it to him. He dressed in Esau's clothes and put animal skin on his hands, because Esau's hands were very hairy. Confused, Isaac gave his blessing to Jacob and promised him the inheritance instead of Esau. This caused a huge fight, one that almost ended in murder before they went their own ways. Thankfully, they reunited, and God promised to bless Jacob's family. Jacob had 12 sons of his own, and like his father and grandfather before him, Jacob had a favorite son. Little did Jacob know that his favoritism would put his son, Joseph, in danger of being killed by his own brothers.
When we did this with the men's group, this is what they could understand.
Oh, no. And it's a good thing that there were no lawyers back then, because Esau could have claimed breach of contract or something. When this, boy, it would have caused a big scene.
So we're going on a couple of different tracks. The first one is, if you look at the outline, what I tried to do is pull out big events. And you can tell I wrote this outline because you can see where my humor started to come into play. And we'll get to that. But when you look at the book of Genesis, everything in the book of Genesis is pointing to Jesus. Every one of these stories, you all know the stories. You all know, if you've spent any time in church, in Sunday school, you know about Abraham. You know about Lot. All right? You know about Ishmael and Hagar. And you know, about Isaac, and then Isaac and Rebekah, and then them having Esau and Jacob. And Esau basically sells his birthright for porridge. And then at the end, Rebekah sort of tricks Isaac into blessing Jacob. And then Jacob runs because he finds out that Esau is going to kill him. You know what I mean? All right, and then he goes and he gets tricked by Laban. All right, you gotta love that, the little rascal Laban, who basically cheats him to have Leah first as a wife and then Rebekah. Okay, well then Jacob sort of gets him back a little bit by doing all the fun stuff with the herd and making them one speckled, one not speckled, and then he's going back to his land because he's trying to escape from the bondage of Laban, and he's like, uh-oh, I got to go to Esau, so I'm going to try to make sure I don't get killed. And Esau splits up his family, sends herds, and all that kind of fun stuff. Well, great, all right. Well then, shoot, we'll get to the family tree. I called it a family that would make Jerry Springer scratch his head.
I see.
Where in essence, you want to talk about crazy, all right? Jacob has kids with Leah, and Leah's like, I'm done. I'll give you my handmaid. What? Okay, whatever. And now the handmaid has some kids, and then Rebecca's like, well, I want some kids, so take my handmaid. Whoa, what? And then all of a sudden, Rebecca has kids. Now we've got 12 boys, 1 girl, 4 moms, 1 dad. All right? You want to see a Thanksgiving that's a little messed up? That's what you get. All right? That's the story that leads to basically Christ. All right, and again, you get Jacob, who gets his name changed to Israel. You wrestle with God, you get your name changed. Okay, and what happens to him? He's stupid as a father. I can't say it any other way. You can go ahead and like one kid better than the other. Do not give them a coat of many colors.
Give him a fur coat, right?
Yeah, don't give him a fur coat and blot it out. And Joseph himself is a bit of an idiot. I had a dream. You were all bowing to me. Okay, that's going to get you a really good Christmas present. Okay, to sit there and say, "Whoa, you're all going to be bowing to me." We got all the dreams and everything going on, and then he, in essence, his brothers sell him into slavery. All right, and what happens is he saves a whole bunch of them. All right. I've just gone through 37 chapters of Genesis.
I'll make a comment that I didn't realize before, because I've read this in the story in a second. And it was his true first cousins that actually had sympathy toward him. Because Reuben didn't want him to kill.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Judah interceded. I was looking at, they have a little chart in this chapter there, and I was looking back at which ones they were, and they were really the sons of Leah, which is sister to Rebecca.
Yeah.
And so I thought that, Rachel. So I thought that was interesting.
Rachel, yeah.
The first cousins really had empathy.
Well,
Judah said the same thing.
And we'll talk about all. We're going to get all to that. But if you look at what we're looking at today, I sort of did a real quick blow through of the outline, but it's really focused in on these 4 people. Okay, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and watch the video, and then we'll sort of we'll get in and dig a little bit deeper. But the whole point of this is God is pulling out a people in a nation for himself. Jews did not exist. All right, there was no Israel until couple, 3 generations later, okay? But God basically is pulling himself a people out. And when he pulls that people out, they're going to be a blessing to all of the nations. And when you look at it from that level, he's trying to bring the nations that he separated back to him. And how is he going to do that but through that line and the Savior, Jesus, coming through that line? Now, you want to look at all the world problems, it all starts right here at the top with Abraham. That whole Middle East is nothing more than a family feud. So, yep. So with that, here we go.
This is yours. This is your story. This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story.
The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." But Abram said, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" And Abram said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Then the word of the Lord came to him, "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." And he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abram believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness.
You know you're old when it takes you a couple tries to get over a speed bump. You know you're old when it takes you longer to rest than it did to get tired. When a 30-year-old mortgage sounds like a pretty clever scam. When your best friend is dating someone half their age and isn't breaking any laws. You know you're old when you discover the meaning of life, but then you forgot to write it down. You know you're old when you often repeat things. You often repeat things. You often repeat things. You know age has a way of sneaking up on all of us eventually. It can leave you with that sense that the best of your life is behind you. Maybe it's not age for you, but just that sense that you missed out on your chance at life to fulfill your dreams or to do something really meaningful. Well, if that's how you feel, chapter 2 of the story is going to be really good news for you. There's a noticeable pattern with God in the Bible where he picks the person to help him with his plan to get us back, who in the lower story sees themselves as the least qualified person for the job. In chapter 1 of the story, God unveiled his vision. He simply wanted to come down into the lower story, which he created, and be with us. But the first people, Adam and Eve, didn't embrace that vision, and as a result, were escorted from the garden. A spiritual virus was born in Adam and Eve that creates the option for evil and selfishness in our lives and our relationships with others. This kind of lifestyle has no place in the community of God. We also learned that this spiritual virus, which the Bible simply calls sin, is transmitted to all of Adam's offspring, and that means us. We found in the story of Noah that the plan to get us back into a relationship with God will not come from people, not even from the best of us. So God begins to unveil his plan in chapter 2 to get us back. He's going to create a brand new nation. Why? Through this nation, set apart for his purposes, he will reveal his presence and his power and his plan to get us back. People of all nations who watch this new nation will be able to discover and see what God is up to. So the first order of business is to pick a couple to get this nation started. Now, who would you pick? A young, vibrant, good-looking, healthy, influential couple with a medically proven capacity to crank out lots of children? That's how we think in the lower story. But God thinks differently in the upper story. Later in the story, Isaiah will tell us that his ways are higher than our ways. God selects an old couple named Abram and Sarai. When God first taps him on the shoulder, Abram is 75 and Sarai is 65. They've got their AARP card in hand, discounts at Denny's for the early seating, and collect Social Security checks monthly. In addition to this, in addition to their age, Sarai is barren. She can't have any children. Why does God pick them? He does this so when people see this great nation, they will see not the strength of Abram and Sarai, but their weakness. They will see God as the one above the scenes of their lives, building this amazing nation. They will see his presence. They will see his power and his plan unfolding. At the opening of chapter 2, God invites Abram to go and leave the comforts of his homeland to a place that God would show him. And he promised to not only give them children, but to make them into a great nation. Not only this, but this new nation would one day be a blessing to all people on the earth. Abram likely didn't comprehend this completely, but God was saying to him, I'm going to use you and this nation as my plan to provide a way for all people to come back into the garden. The Bible simply says, so Abram went. In Hebrews chapter 11, we are told, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Now, there's one thing I know about senior citizens. Being the proud possessor of my own AARP card, we don't like change. How many senior citizens does it take to change a light bulb? Change. Who said anything about change? But this older couple dug deep, got way out beyond their comfort zone, and believed in God. This is their only claim to fame. The story doesn't unfold as smoothly as you'd think. The first order of business is to start popping out kids, right? To have a nation, you got to have peoples, at least one. That's logic to us lower story dwellers. Yet 10 years go by and still no children. Abram is now 85 and Sarai 75. So Sarah gets to thinking, maybe God needs our help. That phrase always leads to disaster. She concocts a plan where Abram sleeps with her servant Hagar. Abram, as suspected, puts up no objections. They have a child named Ishmael. God comes to them and says, I will make Ishmael's offspring into a great nation, but this is not my plan. Ishmael is the father of the Arab nation and the foundation of Islam. 13 more years go by and still no child. Abram is now 99 and Sarai 89. God comes to them and changes their names. Abram's name, which ironically means father in Hebrew, is changed to Abraham, which means father of many. Ouch. Sarai's name, which means princess in Hebrew, is changed to Sarah, which means queen. Ouch. Hard names to live up to. Finally, a year later, Sarah has a child who is named Isaac. Isaac means laughter. You'd laugh too if you had a child when you were 100 years old. But the story isn't over. When Isaac is around 15 years old, just about to get his camel's license, God comes to Abraham and asks him to do a crazy, I mean completely crazy thing. Abraham is now 115 and Sarah 105. Optimal years for raising teenagers, would they say. Here's how it reads. God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. You know, I'm just the average Joe trying to get by in the lower story, but this seems completely insane. But Abraham obeys. We're told in the story, or in Hebrews chapter 11, that Abraham figured that God would raise Isaac from the dead. Now that's faith. As Abraham was bringing the knife down to take the life of his son, an angel, likely Jesus himself, told Abraham to stop. That God has provided a ram whose horns have gotten caught in the thicket. Abraham sacrifices the ram and takes his son home. Whew, that was close. Well, we were told that Isaac gets married to a gal named Rebecca. Now listen to this. They are married 20 years before they have their first child. This nation-building thing is really off to a slow start. But they have twins, Jacob and Esau, and we're told that Jacob has 12 children. Finally, we've got some real momentum. You think you're too old? You think you've missed your chance to do something big, something significant? That's the way we think in the lower story. But if we align our lives to God and what He's up to, some of our best years are still ahead of us. Oh, one more thing, maybe. Embedded in this incredible story is a clue of what is to come. In the story, God said to Abraham, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Compare this with John chapter 3 and verse 16 of the New Testament. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son. See the parallel? But not only that, do you know where the hill of Moriah is? 2 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 1 tells us that it is the place that will later become the city of Jerusalem. It is the same hill 2,080 years later that God's one and only Son, Jesus, would be offered up as a sacrifice on a cross.
Okay, we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna go very, very quick because we sort of have to. But there's a couple of things that I want you to keep in your head. Okay. One, we got this first son, second son thing going on a lot. Okay? And in the culture, the first son is supposed to get the inheritance. But every time in Genesis, it's the second son. Okay? Hold on to that. Because we're going to talk about the first Adam and the second Adam. Okay? So we get this little pattern going. We also get this pattern of can't have kids. Okay? Which is the only way that this whole thing is going to work is if something supernatural happens. Huh? Think about that. Sarah, barren. Rebecca took a long time to have kids. Rachel, who was really Jacob's love, was barren. But somehow they had kids. Everything's a foreshadow of what's to come. Mary, virgin birth. Supernatural births have to take place in this line because otherwise it's just normal. You know, it's just normal, and God is just normal. So let's take a look here. So map-wise, all right. We all know from what we talked about before. She's got a pointer. Around, you see where Babylon is. That is, in essence, where the Tower of Babel was, where they then split the people out. Okay? Now, we don't know where the Garden of Eden is. People will tell you, it's probably down here, in the right at the Persian Gulf because of where the rivers go. Okay, the land had changed so much after the flood that there's really no way But what you're getting at is everything seems to be down here until God spreads everything out. Okay? And then what does he do but pull, right there where it says summer, you get Earl. Or Earl. Okay? And that's where Abraham comes. And hold on a second. I lost my PowerPoint. Hold on for just a second. I gotta grab my little thing. Because now I don't have my notes. Okay. So, you gotta love when technology goes bad. So, you get Abraham and you get Sarah. Alright, and we know from Isaiah what they are. Basically, God is saying through the prophet Isaiah, look to Abraham your father and Sarah, who gave birth to you in pain, the nation Israel. Okay? When he was but one, I called him, then I blessed him and multiplied. So, why did he call Abraham? And here's the other thing. How did Abraham know? Trying to get my PowerPoint. How did he even know? That's the thing that always sort of freaks me out a little bit when I read this story, is the account comes in like it's just a normal thing. You know, Abraham's 75 years old. He is well established. He is rich. All right? He is well off. And all of a sudden, God's calling him and saying, leave and go. And he says, leave your family and go. So he takes Sarah, but he messes up. Right off the bat, he takes one person with him, Lot. Why is he taking her? And so, again, keeping it sort of high level, what he does is he takes Lot with him. And that causes, obviously, a little bit of issues along the way. But then what happens is Lot causes some problems. But then when he gets to Canaan, he goes down to Egypt because there's a famine. God never told him to go down to Egypt. All right? And he didn't hear from God until he came back to the land. Just little point there. But you can see some of his trip, and where all he was going. Basically, he landed in the Hebron area, okay? And that's going to be important. And we'll see that here in a little bit. Now, we know that Abraham and Lot separate. Lot ends up going to the other side of the Dead Sea, Sodom and Gomorrah, and then Abraham takes really what is the nation Israel in modern day. Okay? Great. Lot ends up not having a great time. Okay? And there's a great story in, can't remember which chapter, I'm going to look it up, of the war. There was this war with all the kingdoms of the land. Okay? So we get this war that goes on. Lot gets taken. Abraham goes and saves Lot, and then doesn't take anything from the other kings, but we get Melchizedek. We're not even going to touch that because we just don't have time to dig that one in. But what is interesting is right after that war and right after Abraham's, or Abram at that point's behavior in that war, which is, I'm not taking any booty from you guys, because if I do, you guys will say you made me rich. Well, what happens is right after that is when God comes back and reiterates the promise to him. After these things was that war, okay? These things was saving Lot, okay? The word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision saying, do not fear, Abraham, I am your shield to you. Your reward shall be very great. So all of a sudden, we reiterate, God reiterates the plan. Okay? And I think you have to look at that after these things line and look at that war, and that was a test. That was a test for Abraham of was he going to get richer off of the land in those kings that were in the land, or was he going to have faith in God? Now the unfortunate part is it doesn't last long, because right after that is when Sarah basically says, "It's taking too long. Here's my handmaid." Now we look at that in a modern culture and go, "Dear, what?" Okay, I can tell you right now, we don't have a maid. But if Melody said, "Please take my maid," are you crazy? That's just not our culture. And here's a lesson for today. It was the culture of that day, but it wasn't God's way. And it wasn't God's plan. So think about that when we look at our own culture today.
Did he say she interfered?
She interfered.
Mm-hmm. God needed help.
Oh yeah, God needed help. And God did not need help.
How do we know that it wasn't God's? There were no laws yet.
There's no laws.
There was no nation yet.
There's no nation. Yes.
So how do we know it wasn't God's way?
Go back to Genesis and creation. We created one man and one woman. They shall become one flesh.
And you said that there was no Jewish.
There's no Jews.
No, nothing going
Yeah.
on.
Put up with a lot of
nonsense
Abraham
for 15 years.
I think he was the one who started the law.
Well,
Because I know it said something about
Chris, what
divorce
instilled it
and
in
stuff.
yeah. So this is the fun part. This is there were no laws, and that is true. The Mosaic, the Ten Commandments, which is really the beginning, we're still
Way far from it.
we're 500-700 years away from that.
Yeah.
Okay, we're a long way away from that. But strangely enough, there was how would you say it? There was an instinctual idea of right and wrong. Okay? Now, how can I prove that? Well, I don't think I really can, to be honest with
Well,
you.
Abraham, if he's hearing, I use the word hearing for lack of a better word, he's hearing from God. There's something that sets him apart from everyone else.
Yes.
Therefore, if he's hearing from him at the very beginning as to where he's supposed to go, etc., then it would be pretty darn obvious that he will continue to hear from him as to what steps does he take next and next and next. He's had something that nobody else had. He
Since
had a
Noah.
direct line with,
Yeah.
with God.
Yeah, I mean, the last person that we knew that had that direct line with God was Noah.
So they had all these open marriages and that was just normal. for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah,
It's just-
very much.
Yep. Now, Sarah gives Abraham Hagar to have a kid. She gets pregnant, and Sarah's now going, "Oops, this may not have been a good idea." Okay.
And you know what she does?
Get out.
She blames the man.
Well, this goes right back to the garden.
Okay.
Adam and Eve.
We're not touching that. That's like Social Security. We're not touching that. Okay. But here's what I want to point out, because I am going to add this little line as we're going through the story, and that is when we hear the angel of the Lord, the angel of Yahweh. Well, what happens is we get the first appearance of the angel of Yahweh, which many scholars believe, I personally believe, is the pre-incarnate Christ. Now, here's the thing. Sarah kicks Hagar out. All right? Now, the angel of the Lord found her by the spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Surah. I think that's pronounced right. Sure. And says, go back. Ishmael's not born yet. Go back and submit yourself. Well, we're going to see throughout. Am I right on that? Check me on that.
Yeah.
Okay. The angel of Yahweh is the visible God. Yahweh is the invisible God. And what I'm going to point out along the way is where this angel of the Lord pops up. Because the angel of the Lord comes out in the Old Testament at the most key moments of the story, of the arch. This is the first one. This is the first occurrence of the angel of the Lord, the angel of Yahweh. And what happens is we get Ishmael. Later on, we're going to get Isaac, okay? But we get Ishmael. And what we get is the whole Middle East conflict right here. The Muslims, the Islam, trace their heritage to Abraham. And they trace it to Ishmael. They say Ishmael was the son that was getting sacrificed by God.
The firstborn.
Mm-hmm.
They said the firstborn. But you remember, they had no religion. They
Oh,
wanted
no.
until
Muhammad is
after Christ.
600 years after Christ.
Is it 600?
Yeah, I think it's 600 years after Christ. So,
Yeah, they were just, and some of them had been converted.
oh yeah, absolutely. So anyways, this really tells you where the issues start. It starts right there. It starts right there. Now, mind you, the Edom, Isaac and Esau. Esau ends up being the Edomites.
Yeah, he knows.
And that's also in that Arab line. So,
Did you cover, I mean, he said, when Abraham went to go sacrifice his son?
Yeah.
we're not there yet.
Okay.
We're getting close. Yeah, we're not there yet. But we get now the reiteration again of the covenant. Now this goes back to chapter 12, which is basically, I will make you a great nation, I will bless you, and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse and the ones who curse you, I will curse them. And in all the families of the earth, through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's the nation Israel. And you just take that covenant and you think about how this postage stamp size country and this people that represent a fraction of the world population, yet it's just that. I will bless those and I will curse those. And the United States, when you think about it, when the United States first became a nation, it was funded by Jews. That's another rabbit trail I'm not going to go down. And we were very, very much friendly to the Jewish people at the start of the United States. And that's one of the reasons I think that this country's been blessed, is because how we handle the nation Israel as a partner.
We're going back for just a second to the angel of Haggai in the desert. And the place, specifically the place where she told him, you are a God who sees, was whatever, beer, lahay, boy, between Kadesh and whatever, bread. Does that mean something to us in future references as far as that
I'm sure it does, but I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
I'm not going to go that deep.
That's okay. I know you
Yeah.
had said something earlier about the first.
The place, yeah, it will,
I'll look it up, okay, that's okay.
but then we get this much longer covenant, which talks about the land. The covenant is not only the blessing of the people, but it is specific to the land. So when we get people today talking about that it's not their land, it's like, well, no, it's the land that God gave them. So you can't get away from the fact that the covenant with Abraham is not only a covenant about I'll make you a great nation, I'll bless those that bless you, I'll curse those that curse you, you will be a blessing to all nations, but it's about I'm giving you this land. And we get a baby. We get a baby. And when we get a baby with Isaac, unfortunately, we kick out Ishmael and Hagar. Now, Ishmael's probably
What teenager didn't use the rest?
no. Well, yeah, at this point he's probably in his teens. Yeah.
Story,
13.
13. He's a teenager when he is out. Okay. Again, the angel of the Lord shows up, and he takes care of them. Now, the legend is that they are in Mecca. They were buried in Mecca. So that's where they ended up going. That is obviously.
That's why that's the holy place for the.
Yep. So now we get the wonderful test, which we all know. We've heard the story over and over again. The thing that he's probably Isaac when they take him to Mount Moriah. He's probably 15. Yeah. Okay. He's not a little kid.
No, because it talks about him being able to carry
He's carrying
all
the
that.
Okay. So we know that Abraham passes the test. Now here's the thing. Okay. Here's the thing that you read through the line of Scripture. One is Sarah. She dies shortly after this. Okay? Think about that from a human standpoint. Abraham leaves with Isaac. Sarah's back home. Isaac comes back and he knows what just happened. Okay? He gets what just happened. And I don't think, again, this is personal opinion, but I don't think Sarah ever forgave Abraham for that little incident. Okay? And I'm pretty darn sure that Isaac distanced himself from his father from that point. I mean, because.
Trying to sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of those things you look at it from a personal standpoint, the emotions around that. That's a highly charged emotional thing that's going on here. Again, that's all conjecture. That's all.
And that's what we would be doing, and that's what I'm going to do by saying that. And yet, there's no reference whatsoever to Isaac. What teenager or older, maybe even the early 20s, is going to just stand there? If he could carry all that, he could fend off his father, and yet he did not do that. Or at least we're not told that.
Yeah, we're not told that. You got a 115 plus year old man and a 15-year-old type boy. Yeah.
So maybe, we can't write him off, but he could very well have had his own, was starting his own personal faith with the Lord.
So now let's take another step back from all that, okay? And think about the foreshadowing that this is to Jesus. And there's absolutely no way that the writer which is traditionally thought of as Moses, would understand the clear symbolism, the clear foreshadowing to Jesus. That's where the Scripture is. If you don't think the Scripture is totally inspired, how do you explain that?
Because it's inspired.
I mean, how do you explain that God took him to a mountain? That mountain is traditionally where they think the Temple Mount was built. Went to sacrifice his own son, and again, the angel of Yahweh stops him. Think about that for a moment. The pre-incarnate Christ stopped the sacrifice of Abraham's son and would later take the place of that sacrifice. Woo. Woo. So,
But where does it say, doesn't it say take your firstborn son?
Your only son.
Your only son.
That's what I don't understand.
Yeah, see, we got two going here, so how did he know to take?
Well, the
by,
other one already
by that
left.
time, Ishmael's gone.
Gone. Ishmael's gone.
Yeah, they're.
Remember, he's older.
Well, he's gone, but he's not,
It's,
that
he's
doesn't,
still his
he
firstborn
isn't
son.
dead.
Yeah.
Not right, but he know where he is. He's in the desert, see?
God didn't recognize him.
Yeah, God did
Well,
not.
he did recognize him.
Well, he recognized it,
Recognition of
I know.
but not as the inheritance
Son.
of
Well,
the line.
he wasn't
The
that promise,
coming
but
to the
Yeah.
second son.
Right. But he was gone out of the household then. He was in the desert. Did you know he took another wife, Abraham?
Yes, he did.
I had no idea about that.
And he had kids.
Yeah, and had more kids, had more
He
children.
did.
It's in this,
Behind.
Yeah.
he was behind. That's in that, you know, that concise, the italics in this book.
Okay.
Read it. Okay, go.
So let's keep moving because I mean again
Man.
when you think about all this and put it all together in the grand arch of the story, it's absolutely amazing. You got something.
Well, I mean, I see the symbolism, I see some of the connection, but I see a reach here in trying to make it more than what it is.
Okay.
I
That's fair.
believe it was an example of Abraham following
Mhm.
God's direction, having true faith, being reckoned as a result of that.
Okay.
There's too many differences between Isaac and Jesus, in my opinion.
Well, okay. So let me throw this back on you a little bit. The idea of the patriarch of the nation Israel, the chosen people of God, sacrificing his son. How do you not sort of connect those dots? I mean, how do you think
Was
that's
God sacrificing his son?
Yeah.
You mean?
Well, as I said, I think there's enough differences
Okay.
that I believe that, you know, you can, like many things, you know, a good lawyer can argue either side of it.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, you can make a good case one way or another. I'm just not sure I'm in that camp yet.
Okay. I think that's fair. And I think one of the things that you're saying that I really like is take Scripture for what it says. Don't try to make more out of it than what it says. Now,
The thing that impresses me about it is it happened in the same place.
yeah, that's
Now, I
pretty
didn't
cool.
realize that. You told me that.
That is certainly good
Interesting.
reason to find it a connection. I don't disagree with you.
That's interesting, isn't it?
It doesn't say that Abraham took his only remaining son. It was his only son.
Yeah.
God didn't send down his other son because of one he didn't particularly, like the devil is his other son that he didn't want to think about.
Well, the devil's not his other son.
No,
so,
I
yeah,
understand it. I'm
yeah.
saying the connection though
Okay.
of Abraham has another son. So where do we place that with God's sending Jesus? I mean,
Well, I'll go for just a little bit, then I got to move on. But Ishmael was not part of God's plan.
but he existed.
He existed.
But that's
Absolutely.
Sarah's plan.
Absolutely.
That, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To pretend he isn't in the picture is,
Oh, no, yeah.
you know, that's
In my
Especially when
Bible,
God said he
yeah.
made
I agree. I totally agree with you.
In my Bible, it says God's plan incorporates people's mistakes.
Yes.
That's the lesson of Ishmael's loss.
I think that's
Sounds
very, very, very right. We have free will,
Uh-huh.
and but at the same time, God's plan will be God's plan.
And us messing around with it, trying to make it happen faster, like Sarah did,
Oh yeah.
is not going to change God's perspective and what his plan was in the first place.
Right.
Which is when you get the description for Ishmael, a wild donkey, I mean, they're totally, this is just where I'm totally opposed to each other,
Yeah.
Isaac and Ishmael, as far as wagging came into existence, so to speak. It's,
Well,
yeah.
yeah.
One of the things to point out, in the Garden of Eden, God loved them. They made a mistake, didn't kill them, but they paid for there were consequences.
There's consequences.
Cain and Abel killed him. There were consequences. He didn't kill his brother.
Yeah.
After the flood, I mean, because God did destroy the world, but he said no more. So every time we made a mistake, there were consequences to it. So Sarah's consequence was the birth of a rogue nation that would oppose the Jewish nation.
Yep.
God didn't quit loving
Mm-hmm.
that part of the story. It just wasn't in his plan.
But like you said with your notes there, God.
Right. So he keeps going with his plan. He didn't destroy the rogue
Right.
nation. It's part of the story, but it's not his plan.
Right. Okay, let me keep moving. So now we find Rebecca. All right, and Rebecca is found. Interestingly enough, they go back up to almost where they started to find Rebecca, and then basically we get these two characters, Esau and Jacob. Now, Esau, we hear in Scripture where God hated Esau. Okay, now, that's pretty strong. Okay, but this idea, this pattern of the firstborn not getting the inheritance it's happening too much to be a coincidence. You know, it's happening too much. So Esau despised his birthright, sold it for a cup of porridge here, and then basically Rebecca, who liked Jacob more than Esau, again, do not do that. We're going to see that coming up here with Joseph. Don't do that. It just causes problems. But she tricked Isaac more, I think, than Jacob did, because the idea was Rebecca's idea to do the crazy thing with the blessing. So we get the blessing, we get Jacob running for his life, and basically he runs back here, and keeping it going. He basically so Jacob, the name means cheat. All right. So Jacob runs into a bigger cheat than him, which is Laban. All right. And Uncle Laban, Uncle Laban basically, out tricks the trickster. Okay.
Yeah.
And we go through that whole story. All right. We go through the story of when he was running. Jacob saw Jacob's ladder, the ladder going up and down to heaven. He goes through all the problems over there. He sort of tricks to get his flocks. He leaves. And then he comes back, sort of makes up with Esau, and lives happily ever after. Except for the family. And this is what I'm talking about, that Jerry Springer would still scratch his head about this family. Because here's what we've got. We got 12 sons, 1 daughter. We got 4 moms. All right? I can't even imagine. But I think it's good to understand where the tribes, the sons, fit in. Because Leah has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. Okay? Now, Reuben loses his birthright. So does Simeon. And we're not going to go through all the reasons why, but they lose their birthrights. Levi becomes the priest, and then the line of Judah is where Jesus comes from. And that's Leah's line. All right? And then we come over to Rachel's servant, who has Dan and yes. All right. Then we come back over to Leah, and we get Gad and Asher. And then Leah's like, hey, I can do it again. And we got Issachar, Zubin, and then we get Diana in there. And then all of a sudden, Rachel has Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph is the beloved son. Now, just keep this in mind. Who comes from the line of Benjamin that we should be interested in? Paul. Okay? And just to again, we'll get into it a little bit with Judges, but the line of Benjamin almost got completely wiped out. Almost got completely wiped out. But that we'll get there later. So that brings us to Joseph. All right? So
No.
oh, I got plenty of time. Sorry. So I got 25 minutes. We can do this. Because here's the thing that I'm going to focus on. We're going to go through and we're going to look at Joseph. All right. Once we go through the videos and stuff, I am not going to go through Joseph's life. It's all in here. You know it.
Yeah.
I mean, the story of Joseph is like the best story in the world. What I'm going to focus on is something that's a little different. And that is the archaeology around Joseph that's going to lead us into the Exodus. So, with that, kitty video time.
Is this back to Frazee or is it different?
No, you'll see.
Jacob had 12 sons, but his favorite was Joseph. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were working in the fields. Joseph's brothers resented him, and when they saw him coming, they attacked him and threw him in a well. Then they sold their brother as a slave, took off his coat, soaked it in goat's blood, and showed it to their father, tricking him into believing a wild animal had killed Joseph. Soon after, Joseph was sold to a military official in Egypt as a servant. God helped Joseph do great work, and the official was very happy with him. Joseph was very handsome, and the official's wife tried day after day to seduce him. One day, she pressured Joseph so much that he ran out of the house, leaving his coat behind. She told everyone that he tried to force himself on her. The official was furious and threw Joseph in jail. God once again helped Joseph in all he did. And eventually he was put in charge of all the prisoners. Joseph had the special ability to interpret people's dreams. One day, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, asked Joseph to interpret one of his dreams. He dreamed that 7 fat cows were eaten by 7 skinny cows, and 7 heads of healthy grain were eaten up by 7 heads of dried up grain. God helped Joseph interpret the dream. Egypt would experience 7 years of successful farming, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh was impressed and put Joseph second in charge of Egypt. During the famine, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt looking for food. When they got there, they met with Joseph, but didn't recognize him right away. When Joseph finally told them who he was, they wept because they were sorry for what they had done. Eventually, they went and got their father Jacob and brought him back to Egypt. Joseph took care of his entire family, giving them property in the best part of the land where they lived for the rest of their lives.
Okay, now, where does this one come from?
Okay, so it's the story. It's just the youth videos
Oh,
of
the
the
youth
story.
version,
Yeah,
okay.
the youth.
Okay, got it.
What's a
That-
youth?
Youth.
That would be so applicable, for
Oh,
young people. would get
let
that.
me tell you, they're the best videos in the world. I mean, because we'll grow on these or build on these every time. So I'm getting back. For some reason, the internet's being terrible today. So I know. So again, just high level before we go into the adult video. Don't show favoritism to your kid. It's going to lead into bad things. And then also, if you're a kid and you have dreams about how you will rule over your family,
Don't talk about it.
Don't tell him.
yeah, be careful how you say all of that, all right? So
You're talking to the wrong crowd as far as if you're a kid. You need to go to the high school or the elementary school.
I understand. So Joseph has two dreams. He has the dreams with the bale of hay, and then he has the sun, moon, and the 11 stars. These things are awesome because they go through this last second dream ends up showing up in the book of Revelation. We talked about that before. You get people that look at Joseph and they really sit there and compare him to Jesus. I tell you what, if I'm comparing Joseph to anybody, it's Daniel, because of the way they ended up being second in command of an empire.
Yeah.
All right, that's
a foreign empire when you think
Yeah.
about it, basically.
Now, let's talk real briefly because it's one thing that I have yet to be able to wrap my mind around. So the sons, 10 of them, are out in the field, and Jacob sends Joseph to check them. And you read that and you're like, oh, okay, it's just around the block.
No, it's
No.
not just around.
It's 50 miles away. 50. 50. All right? So, and that's in a straight line. So they are in Hebron. Okay? Shechem is the modern city of Nablus, and I'm probably not spelling that right. In a straight line that is 48 miles. The boy is 17 years old, and there's no Uber. Okay? So he's either walking
Or he's on a donkey.
or he's on a donkey. If he's walking, that's taking maybe 3 days.
Oh, yeah, really?
20 miles a day, something like that. If he's on a donkey, it may be taking him 2 days. But it's taking him a long time. He's 17 years old.
That's amazing.
Okay? He gets to Shechem, and he can't find him, and he says, they're just up a little bit. Well, this to this, I can't remember the name of the old time name. But anyways, that's about 15 miles. Okay? So he has to go another 15 miles, and then that's where, in essence, the deed happens. So Joseph, this is like a smaller map, not to size. So I don't think you grasp the concept of distance on this map. That's why I pulled out a Google map. He starts here, he goes here, it's Dothan. Well, in Dothan is where they throw him into the pit, and then the Ishmaelite traders, who are those guys? They sell him to him, and he ends up down here. That's crazy. That's why I think he to me is a closer comparison to Daniel. Because if you think about Daniel, he got taken away, got thrown to a different land, and worked his way up. So there's a lot of similarities there. Again, similarities. So let's watch the video of the adult one, and then I'm going to take you through a little bit of something that will really lead us into the Exodus, which is next week.
This is your story. This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did.
Prison is a hard place to find yourself in. It's one thing if you did something wrong to get there. It's another thing altogether if you're there as a victim versus an actual criminal, particularly if your conviction was sponsored by the members of your own family. Well, this is precisely the place that a young man named Joseph found himself in. We're introduced to him at the age of 17. He is the son of Jacob, the grandson of Isaac, and the great-grandson of Abraham. He's a part of this great nation that God in the upper story is slowly building to reveal his presence, his power, and his plan to get all people back. But this family didn't function as one who was going to bring us back into a relationship with God. They could barely get along with each other. Studies show us that firearms in the home are almost always either intentionally or accidentally used on family members versus perpetrators. The same is true for the weaponry of poor character. The handgun of lies and the shotgun of deception were used almost exclusively on every member of Joseph's family, particularly young Joseph. You see, of the 12 brothers, Joseph was Dad's favorite. He even sported a coat of many colors that his dad gave him and left his brothers feeling cold-hearted towards him. And to make matters worse, Joseph had several dreams that he believed came from God, where at the end of the dream, all of his brothers were bowing down to him. In his innocence, he shared those dreams with his brothers. His brothers, in turn, declared their little brother their worst nightmare. One day, Daddy Jacob sent Joseph out in the field to fetch his brothers, who were tending to the sheep. They roughed up Joseph and then threw him into a pit. And over lunch, they made the decision to sell their younger brother to a band of gypsies on their way to Egypt. Joseph must have been frightened out of his mind. Once in Egypt, he's sold as a slave to serve in the house of Potiphar, the captain of the guard for the mighty Pharaoh. Then there's this surprising sentence that just appears in the story. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. Even though God allowed his brothers to abuse him, God is now prospering him. With God's help, Joseph quickly rises and is put in charge of Potiphar's entire house. But then another twist. Another bomb drops. We are told that Joseph was well-built and handsome, and that Potiphar's wife made repeated advancements on Joseph, but he does the right thing and he refuses her. Well, one day she tells her husband that Joseph made an advance on her and she resisted. Joseph's put in prison. Up and down like a seesaw, but the next thing we know, he's back up again. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. God again allowed for an unjust attack on Joseph and allowed him to go to prison. Yet once in prison, Joseph immediately gains favor and is put in charge of the prison. And one of the things that God did for Joseph was to give him the ability to interpret dreams. The story tells us that he's in prison for about 2 years when he gets a call from Pharaoh, the main dude, to come and interpret this dream he keeps having. Well, Joseph interprets the dream. Basically, he tells Pharaoh there's going to be 7 years of a bumper crop, or lots of food, and then there will be 7 years of famine, no food at all. You know, it's really helpful to know this. Genesis 41:46 tells us that Pharaoh believes him and puts him second in command over all of Egypt to lead. He's now 30 years old. 7 years of harvest come, and Joseph stores up food to get them through the 7 years of famine. No other nation or people group knows what's coming. At the end of the first 7 years, the 7 years of famine begins, but under Joseph's leadership, they are prepared. Now the famine is affecting everyone, everywhere, including his father and his brothers back in Canaan. Jacob, Joe's dad, sends his sons to Egypt to get some food so they don't die. When they arrive in Egypt, they bow down before the second in command of all of Egypt, their punk brother Joseph, even though they didn't recognize him. Joseph is now 39 years old. 22 years has passed since he was sold down the river, thrown under the bus by his brothers. 22 years passed before the dream he dreamed as a teenage boy came true. After several emotional encounters, Joseph finally reveals his identity to his brothers. Here's what Joseph had to say to them in the story. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." What Joseph's brothers did to him in the lower story was completely wrong and had lifelong consequences of pain and guilt and depression. As a matter of fact, they could never really ever forgive themselves. But God used their sin-filled jealousy to accomplish his overall purpose, his upper story plan, which requires Israel to survive the famine. You see, somewhere in this journey, Joseph captured this, and very few people ever do. This is what enabled Joseph to process all the junk of his brothers and forgive them. Joseph was able to forgive his brothers for what they did to him in the lower story because he captured God's upper story plan, and that's huge. Some of you might think, wouldn't it have been easier for God to use his influence to recommend Joseph for the job instead of making him go through 22 years of struggle? Well, those 22 years of up and down struggles molded Joseph into the kind of man who could do what he did with integrity. Those 22 years gave Joseph an opportunity to see God's hand in life's most hopeless circumstances and situations and to learn to trust in God completely. Joseph, out of his position of power, moves his entire family to Egypt and gives them the fertile land of Goshen. The story tells us that when his dad was getting close to Egypt, Joseph went out in his chariot to meet him. Here's what the story says. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Joseph went on to be 110 years old. Yes, he had 22 tough years, but he ended up with 71 really great ones. And how rich it must have been to know that he was used by God to save Israel and to move God's upper story plan further toward completion. You know, the story is likely being rewritten for your life. Romans 8:28 tells us, and we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This promise of God tells us that if we love God and align our lives to his upper story purposes, everything in our lives, the ups and the downs, the mountaintops and the valleys, the highs and the hurts, the raises and the rejections, the good and the bad, are all working together to accomplish good. So be patient. Trust God. Let him mold you during the difficult seasons to equip you for the assignment ahead. You may be in a prison cell right now, either real or figuratively speaking, but if you align your life to God, your story isn't finished.
So I got about 8 minutes. There's no proof for any of this, right? There's no archaeological evidence at all that Joseph existed, right?
I don't know.
I think there is.
Well, because you look at, because what we're moving into, what this moves into is the Exodus, and there's no proof for the Exodus. I mean, trust me, the critics out there will tell you there's no proof that any of this ever happened. It's all mythology, it's all written, and that's it. This comes from the book of Dreams or whatever. That's an Egyptian book. It's the story from Joseph. 7 fat cows. It tells a story about how they had 7 good years and 7 bad years. This is the map of the trip, which cracks me up because it took them 40 years to get back. You know, they went back and forth about,
They must have not lost
about 4 or 5 times. But what happens is they end up, when they finally come back, when he gets everybody and these 75 people of Israel's family comes back, or comes to Egypt, which God told Abraham would happen, by the way. They settle in Goshen, and they settle in Ramsey, okay? Which messes everybody up because Ramsey, the Pharaoh Ramsey, that doesn't meet the timeline.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Never has met the timeline, and that's why people say there's
and who
no...
did Goshen belong
there's
to?
no,
I've always wondered.
So...
Did it belong to Egypt?
Yes.
Goshen?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So here is a little drawing, and this is the city of Ramsey. Well, guess what? In the 70s, archaeologists has found that under the city of Ramsey was another development. Eris. Yeah. And in this city, it's interesting, they found what was architecture not of Egyptians, but what it would have been at that time Canaan, all right? So where Joseph had lived. And they found a temple, or it was like a big building temple type thing. And interestingly enough, it had 12 pillars. Okay? Pretty cool, huh? Now, that's not conclusive. But what they did find also was a burial chamber, but not for a pharaoh. Okay? So right behind this, they found a burial chamber, which is a little pyramid. And what they found in there was this. Okay? And what this is not Egyptian. All right? The painting, or the painting that was on the coat was a coat of many colors. The head dressing was a head dressing that would have come from the land of Canaan. Okay, you haven't heard this one before. It's in any of the publications, right? This is what the guy would have looked like. Now, if you were Pharaoh and somebody saved your nation, what would you do?
A high order kind of.
There is nothing like this where a little pyramid like that was built for somebody that wasn't a pharaoh. Huh. Now here's the interesting thing. Now you saw most of this was broken into and all that. One of the things that was missing were the bones of whoever was buried there.
Well, that's because Moses took them out of Egypt.
Well, now isn't that
Because I'm just reading this
interesting?
right now about it. They
Yes.
didn't take him back then.
Now, mind
Isn't
you,
that interesting?
this is the scale of it. All right, it's basically double the size of a human. Now, let's be honest and let's be fully transparent. There is not a nameplate on this
No.
that says Joseph.
Joseph, yeah.
Okay, so you are talking circumstantial evidence, but we've got
No idea.
a settlement that is not Egyptian, that is under the city of Ramsey, which is exactly where Moses puts them. All right? And again, 12 pillars, okay, that's a stretch. That's a little bit of a stretch, but interesting nonetheless. And then a tomb honoring someone that's not a pharaoh, but had to be of higher rank, and it matches the time that they would have been. Interesting. Take it for what it's worth.
Circumstantial.
It's all circumstantial, but gee
But it's real
whiz,
coincidental.
Isn't it all?
Yeah.
But it sure looks like it's got God's hand in it.
it sure does. So Jesus is in this whole story every step of the way. All right? God pulls out a nation, and he does it in a miraculous way. And he puts them where they need to be when they need to be. And Joseph, I mean, come on. Who writes that story? And basically, they put him in second in command to save the family, to save everybody, bring them all back together, and sort of protect them.
Do you happen to get the archaeology thing from Barr? Biblical archaeology.
Okay, so where this came from is there's I was going to show you the video, but I knew I didn't have time with everything else. 2 lessons in one night's time. But patterns of evidence about Exodus. And this is basically part of that, which shows the starting point.
How long is the video?
It's about 2 hours long. It's great. It's
You want to see it next time?
Not
No.
2 hours. No.
2 hours?
Well, you say there's no evidence of the Exodus, but they've actually sent sonar equipment
Yeah.
down through the Red Sea, and they found
Yeah, they found.
wagon wheels and shields.
Are you gonna
and
put it
spears.
on in Facebook on?
I don't know if I can find it where I can put it on
Find
there.
it or put it.
So, anyways, that sort of sets up where we're going next week. So next week, it's only one lesson. I'm glad we got through it, and I'm not too late. Well, I'd rather have more interaction, but
I know, but he wants to talk.
but next week we go through Exodus. Basically, we go through the deliverance.
Yeah. Why didn't Joseph's son in here? It's always bothered me. Why
Joseph?
did it? Yeah, but I'm saying Manasseh or Ephraim. Why wasn't it called the land of Ephraim instead of Israel? You know what I mean? Or Judah. It went to Judah line. Why did God?
Because it's got.
I know, but you know why wasn't it Joseph? Because he's the one who saved them.
Yeah.
But they moved it over.
Well, and Joseph doesn't have a portion of the land his 2 sons have.
Yeah, that's true.
There's no longer a tribe of Joseph. There's a tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh.
Because they died there.
All right, my friends. There you go. We made it through. So next week with this, a reminder, we do next week, and then the following week is the Super Bowl.
I'm not watching it.
I don't know. I hope it's not the Patriots.
We hope it's the same. I mean, not the same. We hope it's the
No, it's not the same.
No, not the same. You wait till you see that and get out of bounds. Crazy. Are you leaving?
Well, it's close. It's third quarter, 7 to 14. minutes are up. Oh, hey.
Oh, good idea. To do communion? Yeah.
Well, it's a valid one.
Here, let's pray. Oh, there's not enough of us to show it. Yeah.